Hello everyone. We're going to take a quick walk through the Centenary exhibition at the Museum of the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Normally I wouldn't condone or undertake to video a museum's entire collection on display because obviously that rather defeats the purpose of encouraging people to visit the museum. But given the singular nature of the Centenary exhibition and the fact that it's highly unlikely that this particular assemblage of vehicular history will reoccur at any point in the next few decades, it seemed a reasonable and worthwhile endeavor to record it, for posterity and the delight of your eyeballs, dear viewer. The museum is sited just to the left of the main entry gates for the circuit itself, and was fairly quiet on the Friday morning that I visited. Out front, here we can see one of the disappointingly short-lived but delightfully funky front-engined Nissan GT-R LM Nismo LMP1s that ran its only competition race here 8 years ago, alongside a Bugatti EB110 that raced in 1994. Interestingly, neither of these cars finished the races in which they competed, perhaps why they are stuck outside. The EB110 is on loan from a museum in Brittany, and the Nissan is presumably on loan from Nissan themselves, although I didn't see any placard confirming or denying this. Once past the ticketing desk and entry turnstile, which I didn't video, a rather nice film is playing on the wall. No sound though, showing some highlights footage from Le Mans races past along with bits of B-roll for additional flavor. Apologies about the chap walking in front of me. He got excited when he saw Dr. Ulrich. You can skip ahead to around 3 minutes if you'd prefer to forgo this bit. There's a lovely piece of animation to finish the film up. I particularly appreciated the attention to detail in the vehicles that makes each easily identifiable without resorting to outright branding or photorealism. Anyway, turning left puts one at the proverbial start line, marked with the Départ circuit for a sign from the old circuit. Well, it's probably a replica, but nevertheless. They have the other distance markers scattered throughout the museum to help you keep track of your progress or something. Our first steps into the museum proper see us walking along a sort of gallery of legends, starting with Monsieur Georges Durand, the architect of the original race and one of the key founding members of the ACO, who still organize the 24 Hours of Le Mans to this day. Further along, we see profiles of Enzo Ferrari and Walter Bentley, whose automobiles dominated the race in its early years. Next up, Henry Ford and Ferry Porsche, followed by Dr. Wolfgang Ulrich and Toyota-san, all men who led their respective brands or teams to numerous victories in the past half-century or so. Robert Benoist and Luigi Chinetti were both early winners of the 24 Hours, with Luigi Chinetti's North American race team a hugely influential contributor to Ferrari's mid-century successes in motorsport. Odette Sicco was one of the first women to race at Le Mans, and remains the highest-placed female driver of the event, while Jean Rondeau is the only individual to have ever won the race driving an eponymous car, the Rondeau M379B in 1980. The King of Cool needs no introduction, nor really does F1 world champion Fernando Alonso. Olivier Jean-de-Bion was the first Mr. Le Mans, winning 4 outright victories at the race in the late 1950s and early 60s, a record that stood until Jackie Ickx's 5th win in 1981. Henri Pescarolo also had 4 outright wins to his name, as well as a record 33 starts and a race team besides. We continue with more noteworthy drivers in the characters of Yannick Dalmas, Derek Bell, Frank Biela, Emanuele Pirro, the aforementioned Jackie Ickx, the current Mr. Le Mans, Tom Christensen, and finally finished with Sebastian Buemi and Phil Hill, the first American-born winner of the 24 Hours. Then, of course, you get to see the trophies, past and current, before taking a left into this big round room. Here there are 1/43rd scale models of each car from each race throughout the years, in the order of their classification at the end of the race. I did take pictures of each year's set, but I thought that might get a bit tedious to pull all of them in this video. It's a wonderful way to watch vehicle design as it has changed through the past century, and also see the ebbs and flows of the global economy as the size and makeup of the starting grid changes. There's a large diorama of the track, its different configurations over the years indicated by different lighting, and there's also our first vehicle of the museum, the Bentley 3-liter Sport that took overall victory in the second year of the event, driven by John Duff and Frank Clement, or Franck Clement probably, the first of 6 Bentley victories at the event. The next room features several other contestants and winners from the 1920s, including this magnificent battleship gray Bentley Speed 6, which won the 1929 and 1930 editions of the race, and followed by 2 Lorraine Dietrich B3-6s, which won in 1926 and 1925 respectively. The 1926 model also noteworthy for featuring fog lamps for the first time. All 3 are on loan to the museum from private collections. We then move over to the Tracta GePhi, I have no idea how to pronounce that, which was the first front-wheel drive vehicle to enter the race, coming 16th in the 1928 edition of the race, driven by Roger Boursier and Hector Vassena. Also in the middle of the room is this rather unusual-looking Chenard and Walcker tank, so named because of its streamlined bodywork. It won the first Biennial Cup of Efficiency in 1925 due to its efficiency and robust design. Can't imagine a race car today with leather seats, but times aren't what they once were. We then proceed down the hallway to the golden days of the 30s, passing our second mile marker and a number of vehicles from the 1950s on the other side of the rope to come face to face with a Bugatti Type 50, the first works entry from the Molsheim Mark when it competed in 1931. Difficulties with its tires led to its withdrawal before the race finished, but it was the beginning of a long association for the brand. We also see our third mile marker, the back quarter of a lovely Alfa 8C coupe, and vehicles of future decades. But first, we'll duck into the annex just behind the mile marker to see what's hidden away. First, we start with the 1931 winner, another Alfa Romeo 8C, but this one a roadster, notable not only for its victory, but also for breaking the race distance record, the first time the race had exceeded 3,000 kilometers. And for kicking off a string of victories for Alfa that culminated in 1934 with this machine of beautiful blueness. Driven by Luigi Chinetti and Philippe Tancelin, it was the only Alfa to finish out of 4 entries and won by 180 kilometers over the second-placed vehicle, the second largest margin of victory to date. Alfa Romeo's dominance was broken in 1935 by this vehicle, a Lagonda M45R, which made the best of poor weather conditions and crowned the youngest overall winner of the race to date, 22-year-old Louis Fontes. Here also displayed is a 1937 Bugatti Type 57 straight-8 engine, similar to the one which powered the 57G tank to victory in that same year. The race winner and only extant 57G is in the collection of the Simeone Foundation and on display in Philadelphia. Moving back out into the main hall, we can further appreciate this Alfa 8C Berlinetta in the round. Although it failed to finish during its 1938 competition entry, it held a commanding lead thanks to the 220 horsepower produced by its 2.9-liter supercharged straight-8 until mechanical problems on lap 219 caused its retirement. Let's take a moment to relish its general beauty and excellent streamlined rear wheel covers. Love the black wire wheels as well. Next, we see the smallest engined vehicle ever entered in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, the Simca 4 Gordini. Powered by a 570cc four-cylinder engine, it failed to finish the 1937 race, but won the Index of Performance due to its efficiency, and covered nearly 2,000 kilometers on track. Next to it is an enormous slab of Americana, Briggs Cunningham's Cadillac Le Monstre, which must be one of the physically largest vehicles ever entered in the race, and was also the first to have a pit radio. An early attempt at better aerodynamic design, its bodywork was designed in Grumman's wind tunnel, and despite gearbox issues, it finished 11th overall, just behind its conventionally bodied sister. This adorable little car is, perhaps unsurprisingly given the color, a Ferrari, a 166mm standing for Mille Miglia, to be specific, and the same model as the first Ferrari entered at Le Sarthe. In the first race to be held after the war, Luigi Chinetti drove 22.5 of the 24 hours of the race and gave Ferrari its first victory at the same time, the first victory ever for a V12 engine and the smallest engine to win outright until that was tied in 2015 by Porsche 919's 2-liter V4. I bet the 166mm didn't have a 400 horsepower hybrid system though. Anyway, we see next Porsche's first entrant, a streamlined 356 direct from the 1951 race in which it placed 20th overall and first in class. It's difficult to tell in this video, but the numbers on the bonnet and side are obviously and delightfully hand-painted, which I found far more amusing than I had any right to. Moving further along, next is the 1952 Mercedes W194, better known as the 300 SL, one of the most iconic and influential vehicles of its era. Instantly recognizable due to its gull-wing doors, the 300 SL pioneered a number of engineering techniques that quickly proliferated to other manufacturers. Of particular note is the small air brake on the roof, which foreshadows the much larger one that would be fitted to its successor, the 300 SLR. The 1952 race, which Mercedes won, was generally interesting, as Pierre Levesque, driving a Talbot at the time, attempted to drive the entire race solo, and not only did he nearly succeed in driving, he very nearly won, taken out in the 23rd hour by a misshift and a broken conrod. He had been in such a commanding lead that it took the winning number 21 Mercedes seen here 20 minutes to overtake his stranded Talbot. We then encounter this Gordini T30, a vehicle designed and built by the chap who had previously raced the little blue number we saw next to Le Monstre. Featuring a much larger 2.5-liter six-cylinder engine, it was raced in 1954 by a man nicknamed the Sardine and that year's winner of the Tour de France, and took class-winning honors as well as 6th overall. The same chassis went on to race in 3 subsequent years, although it did not finish every time. Next, we have 2 Jag D-types, the first in an exquisite metallic blue and the second in a still lovely French blue. This first car was driven to victory in 1957 by Ron Flockhart and Ivor Bueb in a race that could be called Britain's finest hour at Circuit de la Sarthe. Despite all being privateer entries, D-types took 5 of the top 6 spots, spoiled only by a Ferrari 315 in 5th place and smashing the old distance record by over 220 kilometers. Churchill hopefully was pleased. The next exhibit on the left, I'll attend to the starboard vehicles shortly, is a Maserati birdcage, so named for its complex tube frame chassis comprised of more than 200 Combe-Ollie tubes that provided an unprecedented level of both chassis stiffness and lightness. All in, with its 2.9-liter straight 4 and a 5-speed manual, the vehicle weighed only 600 kilograms or 1,300 pounds, which helped this car break the lap record and top speed record in the 1960 race. But reliability issues meant that it was never truly in contention for the overall win that year. Following on, we have another lovely piece of Italian metal in the Ferrari 250 GTO. This particular vehicle was entered by Chinetti's North American Racing Team, or NART, and for some reason I pretty much walked past it. We'll return to it in just a moment. We see also the Mark II Ford GT40 of Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon, which was granted victory in 1966 after team orders pulled back the leading car of Ken Miles and Denny Hulme for a photo finish to celebrate the culmination of the Ford-Ferrari war that had started earlier that decade, breaking the lap and distance records in the process. Pivoting away from the next GT40 because there were people in the way, we're presented with the Ferrari 250 LM. which was something of a crash development program for 1965 to help stave off Ford's improving GT40s. While the larger prototype cars were intended to compete for the overall win, the 250's reliability and good road keeping helped it in the overall standings, with this car coming sixth and an identical one run by Nart coming first overall. Behind it, we have a Rover BRM turbine car, which ran outside the general classification in its 1963 outing due to its unusual power plant, but managed to earn a 10th overall finish in 1965 under the drivership of Graham Hill and Jackie Stewart. Behind that, we see another Ferrari, the 250P, their first mid-engine sports car, which took overall honors here in 1963, along with a lap and distance record. Moving back to the other side, we have a further development of the GT40, the Mark IV, which had greatly improved aerodynamics over the Mark II, as well as a whopping 7-liter V8 motor. Its victory in the 1967 race, which also saw the lap record, top speed record, average speed record, and distance record broken yet again, led to a limit on engine capacities for the 1968 race, which Ford won. Again. And finally, we have the Ferrari that just couldn't quite beat Ford at Le Mans. In front of us, the final version of the 330, the P4. Though quick, they suffered from reliability difficulties and came third in the 1967 version of the race. That being said, they did manage a 1-2-3 finish at that year's 24 Hours of Daytona, so that's something. This 1968 version of the GT40 went back to a 5-liter V8, and this vehicle ran as a privateer entry organized by one John Wyer and sponsored by Gulf Oil, as we can clearly see by the iconic blue and orange livery. It took home the top honors in both 1968 and 1969, the latter year with Jackie Ickx and Jackie Oliver behind the wheel, the 1968 victory Ickx's first of 6. Next, we have something that looks a bit like if the Ghostbusters had been in partnership with Lola Cars, the Howmet TX turbine car. Designer and driver Ray Heppenstall used a helicopter turbine from Continental Aviation as the vehicle's power plant, and Howmet, an manufacturer of precision metal products for whom my grandfather used to work, ironically enough, provided the financial backing. 2 vehicles were entered in the 1968 race, but perhaps because they failed to secure a 16-year-old Dan Aykroyd's blessing, neither saw the checkered flag. Another car that needs no introduction, we have the Secretary's Porsche, so jocularly named because of the all-hands-on-deck effort that was undertaken to get enough 917s ready in time to meet the homologation requirements. This particular model is a 917K, or Kurczak, for short tail, which was developed for the 1970 season after its debut in 1969 revealed significant aerodynamic flaws in its original elongated rear deck. This car, run by Porsche Salzburg, topped the podium after a grueling race of attrition to grant Porsche their first of 19 outright victories at Le Mans. And now let's take a brief break because that's a lot of museum. Enjoy this sort of palate cleanser of some of my walking and cycling through the fields and vineyards of Champagne last weekend. Anyway, we rejoin the action still in the 1960s, which has been a bizarrely long-lasting decade, with a very funky Charles Deutsch-designed Peugeot-powered vehicle, a furtherance of the aerodynamic research that was becoming increasingly important at the time. The SP66C's bulbous teardrop bodywork enabled it to hit over 250 kilometers an hour on the Mulsanne Straight, although reliability remained a challenge, and they failed to complete either of the 1966 or 1967 races in which they were entered. Next to it is another Porsche 917K, This one wearing updated bodywork with further aerodynamic improvements and decorated in a very fetching rendition of the Martini livery. It took home the overall victory in 1971, in part thanks due to its magnesium tube frame chassis, which also makes it the lightest of the 917s constructed. Well, Can-Am notwithstanding. And in the next exhibition area, we have yet another 917. This one, however, is a longtail or Langkak, also entered in the 1971 race that achieved the highest overall and average lap speed recorded up to that time, thanks to its extremely low drag rear deck and those aerodynamic wheel fairings. 3 guesses as to who the sponsor was for this one. We then have a series of Matras, which in 1972 brought the first victory for a French manufacturer since the 1950 race. Designed specifically to compete at Le Mans, they featured 3-liter V12s of increasing power outputs, eventually reaching around 450 bhp. Henri Pescarolo drove these MS670s to victory in 1972, 73, and 74, partnered with Graham Hill in 1972 and Gérard Larousse in subsequent years. 1975 saw a change of regulations that rendered the Matra Simcas ineligible, and 1975 saw a John Wyer-backed vehicle return, the Mirage GR8. Is that pronounced great by chance? Which found its way to victory against a reduced field due to fuel restrictions, giving the dynamic duo of Jackie Ickx and Derek Bell their first victory as a team, Bell's first of 5 and Ickx's second of 6. We then pivot, both literally and figuratively, to enjoy the first of many BMW art cars to feature in sports car racing. This particular example, a 3.0 CSL Batmobile decorated by Alexander Calder. Not my favorite of the BMW art cars, but it's fun all the same. Kind of reminds me of a design you'd expect on a cereal box in the 90s or something. Next to the Batmobile is the decidedly unique Renault Alpine A442B, which achieved outright victory in 1978 thanks to a clever windscreen design and a turbocharged 2-liter V6 that again set a new lap record and managed to exceed a distance of 5,000 kilometers for the first time since 1971. Opposite the Renault Alpine is the 1977 winner, a Porsche 936 that performed one of the most daring comebacks in history of the race, when Jackie Ickx managed to recover from 42nd place to the lead before engine troubles caused them to spend most of the last hour in the pits. They had still managed to complete a sufficient distance to retain the lead, however, and after a final lap at the end of the 24 hours, Ickx took his third victory alongside Hurley Haywood and Jürgen Barth. Next to the 936 is the 935, specifically the Moby Dick Group 5 car, immediately recognizable for its arguably absurd bodywork. Though just as quick as the prototype Group 6 cars like the 936, it absolutely guzzled fuel and only finished 8th overall in its 1978 race outing. We then head down the stairs and find ourselves confronted with another sea of Porsches, this time starting with the 956 and quickly progressing to the 962s, before we come to the catchily named WMP88, designed and built with the sole goal of breaking the 400 km/h barrier on the Mulsanne Straight, which it achieved in 1988 with a Vmax of 407 km/h. Peugeot, who had provided the engine for the car, latched onto this and heavily marketed a claimed speed of 405 to tie in with a launch campaign of their new 405 saloon. Then another car that needs no introduction. The Mazda 787B remains the only non-piston powered car to win Le Mans, as well as the first Japanese car to take top honors. We then see the McLaren F1 GTR, the last GT to win outright in 1995 with its BMW V12 and general loveliness, followed by the 1998 winner, the Porsche 911 GT1, which was essentially a GT in name only, but was sufficiently quick to take first and second overall that year. Working backwards from the other side of the walkway, we have another Rothmans 962 and another 936, both driven to victory by Jackie Ickx and Derek Bell in 1982 and 1981 respectively. Love the aerodynamic wheel fairings on the 962. We then pan over to the 1980 winner, the aforementioned Rondo M379B, the only time that a constructor has built, raced, and won with their own vehicle of the 24-hour race. I believe that is what we can only refer to as goals. Moving forward again, we have another cigarette-sponsored vehicle, this time the Jaguar XJR9. Powered by a 7-liter V12 and sporting an extremely low-drag body, the XJR9's 1988 race brought Jag victory in the first time in 3 decades, leading for nearly 3/4 of the entire race distance. It's difficult to see on the back wall as we pan because of how I had my camera positioned, but it also appears that the 90s had everyone cosplaying as characters from the Blues Brothers, with dark suits, Ray-Bans, and pork pie hats. We all miss John Belushi, I suppose. On the other side of the sound from Chicago are the 2 Peugeots that brought the French marque their first and second victory in 1992 and 1993 respectively. There's something very compelling about the shapes of these cars, and I'm immensely looking forward to seeing them on track at the Classic later this week. They're also the first V10-powered vehicles to win the race overall, although not the only ones. Ooh, foreshadowing. We then say hello to the TWR Porsche WSC-95, which, while running a Porsche engine and gearbox, was built on a Jag XJ14 chassis and entered through a collaboration team of Reinhold Jost and Tom Walkinshaw. It won both in 1966 and 1967, replacing the 962 engine for a 911 GT1 engine in its second year, and remains the last chassis to have won Le Mans twice. The 1997 victory also saw the first one for a certain Mr. Tom Christensen, who would find his way back into other Yost-run vehicles in the near future. But first, we have the 1999 winner, a BMW V12 LMR, which gave BMW its only win to date. Outright, that is, driven by the team of Joachim Winkelhock, Pierluigi Martini, and Yannick Dalmas. To paraphrase the dubious wisdom of a different Tom Servo, those aren't so much names as they are bad Scrabble hands. If memory serves, however, the engine in the V12 LMR was very similar to the one installed in the 1995 McLaren winner as well. We'll take a nice final walk through the 90s as we enter the new millennium and what can only be called the decade of Audi. The 2000 winning R8 kicked off a string of victories unmatched in consistency before or since, with works and privateer R8s dominating the sport for the next 5 years, with only a brief blip from the R8C-derived Bentley Speed 8 off to the right, which we'll revisit in a moment. Happily, Audi's dominance of Le Mans was more honest than that of the other 2000's domination of a French sporting event by a non-French organization. Anyway, we have also the R8, or R10 and R15 TDIs, the first non-petrol powered vehicles to win the event, and finally the Peugeot 908, which, as mentioned in my video about its successor, was the only vehicle to really give Audi a black eye during its best years. Also diesel-powered and sporting a very compelling coupe body, it looked fast and it was fast, but also struggled somewhat with reliability, which cost it victory in several of the years it was entered at Le Mans. Backtracking slightly, we have more R8s and the Bentley EXP Speed 8, which largely dominated the 2003 season, run by Yost personnel and Yost drivers taking a break from the R8, such as Tom Christensen and Dindo Capello. 2004 saw a return to normalcy, with an Audi Sport Japan R8 taking top honors, again with Capello and Christensen at the wheel, along with Formula Nippon driver Seiji Ara. The ADT Champion Racing car you just saw won the 2005 edition of the race, this time driven by JJ Leto, Marco Werner, and, yet again, Tom Christensen, a record 7th victory for the Dane. More open-top diesel Audis from the late 2000s are next, including the 2010 winner and current distance record holding R15 Plus. That car was replaced in 2011 by the R18, which still ranks as my favorite design for a modern prototype. The number 2 car in shot at the moment, Red Sonja, won the 2011 edition against staggering odds after its 2 sister cars crashed out earlier in the race, and the Peugeot 908s put up an incredible fight. The car's race engineer, Lena Gade, was the first woman race engineer to win the event. We then move into the beginnings of the hybrid era, with the 2013 race winner visible here, and the 2012 race-winning vehicle off to the left. I find their shaping of the headlamps on the R18 into a vaguely number 1 shape a delightfully cheeky nod to their past decade of successes. We finish, before backtracking to the 2012 winner, with the Porsche 919 that broke Audi's dominance in 2015. I offer the 2012 R18 e-tron Quattro without further comment. This is the 2016 winner, Porsche's second in a row after the leading Toyota TS050 failed on the start-finish straight with a mere 3 minutes to go in the race. This was one of the first editions of the race I watched live, although not in person, and it remains one of the only times I've found the result of a sporting event emotionally devastating. Of course, as we walk into the final room, we are actively reminded that after a final Porsche victory in 2017, Toyota has gone on to win every edition of the race since then until this year, but nevertheless. The final room contains that final 2017 winning Porsche, and Toyota's winning TS050s and GR010s from the past several years, most still wearing the battle scars from their final races before retirement. I do find it interesting that despite consistent victories in the WEC, Toyota has maintained their use of the number 7 and number 8 numbers, rather than switching to use 1 and 2, and that the number 8 car has most of the Le Mans victories to its number. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our tour, completed with a mural version of the graphic from the entry video and the final mile marker, indicating that we have indeed arrived. I hope you've enjoyed this walk through the Centenary exhibition, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have a good evening, everyone.